going to forget later. Be maybe somebody who's going to watch this. I had somebody miss on Wednesday of last week. I did manage to do this last Wednesday. Barely. Parallelism is, parallelism is a feeling. That's not really true. Parallelism is an idea. So think about what parallel means, right? It's like train tracks. The ideas go in the same groove. They match each other. And so when I say, technically, P1 is choose 3 words of the same kind. That when I say of the same kind, that makes them parallel, right? Or 3 phrases of the same kind or clauses. And do you mind if I read what you said? Is that okay? Okay. You said, this proposition comes from a superhuman monster. Now you're going to list 3 things. With a somewhat good understanding of the world, with human strength, and is a cold-blooded murderer. And we have, he's a monster with a good understanding of the world, with human strength, and I'm expecting a with, right? And then you said, and is a cold-blooded murderer. And suddenly I just trip when I read there's nothing grammatically incorrect about what you did, by the way. It's not a fragment, but this is the sort of thing that when you take the ACT, or as they used to, they give you sentences like that. And it's like one of those, I would change this, I would change this, I would make no change, that sort of question. And what they're looking for is for them to be in parallel, because it just sounds better. So we probably would want to say, he's a superhuman monster with a somewhat good understanding of the world, with human strength, and with a vendetta against the world. A murderous vendetta against the world, or something like that, and then it would follow that parallel track. Does that make sense? But again, there's nothing grammatically wrong with what you did. It just doesn't. It doesn't parallel. It doesn't track. I'm trying to remember something. And I feel like it might be Bugs Bunny, but totally remember. But it's somebody saying a poem. And then have you ever heard somebody do this as a joke? You're saying a little rhyme, but then, you know what the word should be. Everybody knows what the word should be, but they say a different word that doesn't rhyme. And then it makes you trip over, but it's for humorous effect. I feel like Bugs Bunny would do that to Elmer Fudd or someone else, but I don't really remember the episode. Okay. All right, it's kind of like that you get to the place where you think you know what should come next, and suddenly it doesn't come. All right, that's enough of that. Let us read our prayer before study in the back of the book. Christ my Lord, the giver of light and wisdom, who opened the eyes of the blind man, and transformed the fishermen into wise heralds and teachers of the gospel through the coming of the Holy Spirit. Shine also in my mind the light of the grace of the Holy Spirit. Grant me discernment, understanding, and wisdom in learning. Enable me to complete my assignments and to abound in every good work, for to you I give honor and glory. Amen. Most blessed Lord, send the grace of your Holy Spirit on me to strengthen me, that I may learn well the subject I am about to study, and by it become a better person, for your glory, the comfort of my family, and the benefit of your church and our nation. Amen. All right, let us take a look at Edgar Allan Poe. Are there any of you who are unfamiliar with the poem The Raven? Oh, awesome. I've had quite a mix. Yesterday I had, all the boys was like, no, I've never read this poem before. I'm like, awesome. And then another day, I'm like, yeah, we know this poem. Okay. I'm going to read it just because it's amazing. And because I always want to read it out loud. And also because it's a wonderful out loud poem. the rhythm and the rhyme scheme and everything is just brilliant. What do you guys know about Edgar Allan Poe? What's his stock in trade? What do you associate anything particularly with Edgar Allan Poe?
I think I remember seeing something about him like predicting a scientific object, even though he wasn't particularly in the sciences.
Kind of like a sci-fi sort of.
Yeah.
Okay.
He
Okay.
predicted like black holes or something.
I do not know about that, but it would not surprise me somehow. What do you know about Poe?
Did a lot of like horror poems and stories.
He's very creepy. He's very creepy. That was his thing. And he, we're going to talk about the rest of Emma today. And guys, don't read books because I've got to learn a lesson from this book. Don't do that. Oh my gosh. Read books because they're really good. But we do learn things from books. We do discover things about ourselves. But don't dissect it to find the moral. Please don't do that. However, Poe took that even a step farther. And he said, you know what? Art just exists for its own sake. Art does nothing. Art teaches nothing. Art is just there to be artistic. I'll let you think about that. By the way, perhaps you know, is it MGM? Whatever, the movie theater with the movie company with the lion that roars. Do we all know what I mean? Yeah. The circle and the lion roars. And it says, ars gratia artis, art for the sake of art. It's Poe's motto, sort of. I mean, I didn't get this from Poe. It's just an artistic saying. But the idea is that, hey, we're not here to make the world a better place or to communicate anything in particular. It's just a random work of art. I don't know how I feel about that. I'll let you consider how you might feel about that if you agree or disagree. That's what Poe thought. So he didn't really, he didn't think we were going to learn a lesson from being creeped out, So he writes a famous story about the guy who, lives with this guy and he hates the way his eye looks. So he murders him and puts him under the floorboards. Nice. But then his heart keeps beating. He thinks he hears the heart beating. And the cops come and he's like, I'm going to put the cop's chair right over the floorboard where that guy is. But he hears the beating. And it drives him bananas. Or the one where the guy hated some other guy and so bricked him up behind a wall so he would starve and suffocate to death. That sort of thing. Or the party people had where the plague came as a guest. The Red Death came as a guest, dressed up in this bloody thing, and then just like kills them all from the plague. Nice. That's Edgar Allan Poe. However, he does have another claim to fame, and it is he is known as the first detective story writer. The kind of thing where there's a murder and the room is locked and no one came in and no one went out, but the guy is dead, but there's no other culprit, and how did the guy die and how did the culprit get away? The locked room murder mystery. Poe. The Murders in the Rue Morgue is known as the first detective story. So he had wide-ranging interests, and he was also a literary critic. I told you earlier that he hated Longfellow because he thought Longfellow was low class. He was too popular. Because Longfellow was like pop music, like what the people like, and Poe is just, I don't know what the equivalent would be. He's classical music, or he's like some sort of weird off-the-edge grunge heavy metal punk. And what do they call the, what's the term, guys? Music that's, no, like it's independent. It's a, what? Yes, exactly, thank you. Out of the loop. All right, and that was what Poe thought of himself. Okay. That said, let's look at the Raven. I just want you guys to see if you can figure out what happened to this guy. This is it. And mostly this is just an excuse for me to read this poem because it's awesome. And you should hear it out loud. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow. Sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art shirt no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore." But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, "Nevermore." This I said, engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er. But whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. "Wretch," I cried, "thy God hath lent me, by these angels he hath sent thee respite, respite and nepenthe from the memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore. Desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly I implore, is there Is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a saint and maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven never flitting still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. What's happened to this guy? What's his story?
You lost somebody?
He lost somebody. Lenore has died. And what does he spend his evenings doing? Reading, and why? Yeah. To occupy his mind. He says, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow for the lost Lenore. I'm just going to distract myself. Suddenly, somebody taps on his door one night. And who does he think it is?
He thinks it's Lenore.
Yeah, because it says the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered. And the echo murmured back the word, Lenore. He can't stop thinking about it. He can't stop thinking about it. And in a minute, he hears a little tap. He's like, is it Lenore? Is she back? But what is it?
The raven.
It's a bird. It's a large black bird who is known as parakeets sometimes, as being a mimic, right? So it's learned one word, nevermore. And at first it starts out, okay, he's like, oh, I wonder what your name is. Nevermore. Like, oh, that's a funny name. He says, oh, I never thought there'd be a bird with a name like Nevermore. And he says to him, oh, yeah, all my friends always leave me. Lenore left me. He'll leave too. This bird will leave me. And it says, nevermore. Oh, I'm not leaving. And at this point it sounds, oh, he's got a new friend. Yay. And he's startled by it, but he says, in my favorite stanza, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster till his songs one burden bore. He says, oh, he's escaped from some master who, lost everything, and he just kept muttering, oh, nevermore, nevermore will I have enough to eat, nevermore will I be rich, and this bird just learned this word. So I wondered what it meant by croaking that. And as he sits on the cushioned velvet lining that she shall press, nevermore, he speaks to himself and he says, wretch. He doesn't mean the bird. Wretch, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Nepenthe is something you drink and it's like a drug, right? It blocks out your memory. It's like drinking from the river Lethe, right? It wipes out your memory. God is giving you a chance to forget. He's brought this weird bird, maybe it's like your new pet or something. God has given you the means of forgetting. All you have to do is take it and drink it. He says, drink it and forget this lost Lenore, quote the raven, nevermore. Oh, you will not forget. And now it's taken a very ugly turn. Because the nevermore sounded, no, nevermore will I leave. Nevermore will you be alone. And now suddenly it's, nevermore will you forget how much it hurts right now to have lost her. So this is when he has a breakdown, right? And starts yelling at it. Prophet, thing of evil. He asks it, is there balm in Gilead? This is from the Bible. Gilead was a part of Israel known for healing balms, medicinal balms. So finding balm in Gilead is going to the place that will heal you. He says, is there balm in Gilead? Nevermore. Oh, there's no healing. Then he asks again, tell me, somewhere in paradise, is there going to be a place somewhere where I can see her again? Will I hold her again? Nevermore. And then he says, leave. Take thy beak from out my heart and take thy form from off my door. Stop reminding me. And it says, nevermore. And the raven never flitting, still is sitting. And now his soul will be lifted off the shadow of the Lord, nevermore. Is it like The Conjuring? Horror? No, it's not. It's just mildly creepy. But the more you read it and the more you think about it, the creepier it gets. Like, why? He says he thinks angels sent it. He thinks God sent it. And then at the end you think, Satan sent it, just like to torment him in eternity for this lost woman. It might be helpful for you to know that Poe, the writer, in reality lost people. His mother, everybody used to die of tuberculosis. I have nothing to say about everybody didn't die of tuberculosis, but a lot of people died of tuberculosis. And nowadays, is there a tuberculosis vaccine? I don't think there's. Why isn't everybody dying left and right of tuberculosis anymore?
Yeah, I think generally mostly antibiotics, but I think tuberculosis you can't really get rid of tuberculosis.
It's under control.
It's kind of like a cancer that grows slowly.
When I was a little girl, this has nothing to do with our lesson today, but this is a fun fact about the ancient times when Mrs. Ferguson was a little girl. Every year, the school nurse would come around, and they had this it was round, and it had 4 prongs. And it was infected with a dead tuberculosis. It was something. And if you had tuberculosis, it would puff up. And they would just go around all of us and poke us with the thing. Like, everybody roll up your sleeves. It's like, oh, here comes the nurses. Like, it's the poke day. And they just poke. And then we'd all, like, for the rest of the day, it's like, oh, am I dying of tuberculosis? And none of us were, to the best of my, and it just didn't do anything but leave little holes if you weren't ill. But it would apparently puff up like a mosquito bite. And then they would treat it, apparently. But anyway, apparently it was prevalent enough in the 70s that they felt it necessary to go through schools and poke us all with the little round thing with the 4 prongs that made you bleed a little bit sometimes. It wasn't fun, but it was kind of when you were really little, it was like, I have to show all my classmates I won't flinch when she pokes me with the thing. It was an honor thing, And if you winced, it's like, oh, you're soft. Anyway, it's my story about tuberculosis. So Poe's mother died of tuberculosis. He also married his cousin, and she was really young. I don't know how to she was like 12 or 13. Like, not 12 or 13. Like 30-ish.
Whoa!
I don't know. Anyway, it was not weird.
Are they in America?
Yeah. It used to be quite normal for men who were quite older to marry women who were not. I have nothing to say about the cousin. It was Virginia Clem, and she died of tuberculosis. And then his mentor, he was adopted and raised by this other family, and then one of them died. People were just keeling over like flies left and right around Poe, which is depressing. And so people read about his life, and try to think, what turned Poe into the master of twisted, weird, murdering people and burying them under the floor sort of thing. We don't know. We're going to read some more poems by Poe next week. if you want to look ahead, you can to next week's. I want you to read this at least one more time this week, and I want you to read it out loud. You don't have to read it to someone. But it's so fun to hear it because of the rhythm and the rhyme. Next week, I will tell you a little tidbit about the death of Poe. Poe is actually a very interesting guy. But this will make you want to come back next week, hopefully, and hear about the death of Poe. Okay. I only have one comment about the miscellanies. Miss Leslie's behavior book for girls, where she tells us how to be polite. And on page 127 in your reading guide, she says this, kind of in the middle of that page. However smart and witty you may be considered, do not exercise your wit in rallying and bantering your friends. If you do so, their friendship will soon be worn out or converted into positive enmity. A jest that carries a sting with it can never give a pleasant sensation to the object. Okay. Would somebody like, in your own words, to tell me, what is this advice? What does she not want us to do?
Don't make fun of people, especially like when like insulting their like intelligence and like comparing yourself.
And what might be the purpose of the person making that joke, according to Miss Leslie? She says, however smart and witty you may be considered, do not exercise your wit that way. Exactly. Because I can think of the burn that is the perfect burn to say currently. Hopefully we are none of us this person. If we are, we should work on it. But perhaps we know this person. My children will never watch this, or the one that might watch it would laugh. But I have a child who is this person, who thinks he's funny, but he's insulting. And so, but sometimes he pulls it off okay. And so we were having Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner or something like that, and my daughter said something kind of stupid. And it was just marginally stupid, you know. And there was just silence because there was no answer to this thing. And so my son at the end of the table just said, in this dead silence, "She's the simple one." And fortunately, she just laughed and laughed and laughed. And she still comes and she says, "You know, I'm the simple one." I'm like, we know. But it could have gone bad really easily. You know, like it's a holiday meal and we're all, I was like, oh, she's the simple one. Like, it's not a joke that we make, but it turned out okay in this case. But no, try to be witty at someone's expense and causing them embarrassment is not cool. And so why did I read this particular thing? What happened in Emma that is exhibit A of don't do this? She horribly insulted Miss Bates. Now, I don't know if when you read that, and just to recall what was happening, they were at a picnic. Everybody's there. All the people who know Miss Bates. And of course, we know Miss Bates at this point. Miss Bates, she never shuts up. And the original, they want to play a game. And Frank Churchill is feeling particularly lively. And he says to Emma, you know, well, we need to get people riled up. We need to get something happening. He says, okay, everybody, Miss Woodhouse wants to know what everyone is thinking. Okay, in general, this is not a good request. Because frankly, none of us wants to know what other people are thinking a lot of the time. So Mr. Knightley says, is Miss Woodhouse totally sure she wants to know what everyone is thinking? Because apparently Mr. Knightley's thinking something not very good about that currently. It just laughs. No. Okay, Frank Churchill. Miss Woodhouse demands that everybody say one clever thing, two moderately clever things, or three very dull things. And poor Miss Bates says, oh, thank goodness, because I don't think I could come up with anything clever, but I'm sure to come up with 3 very dull things. She says in such a good-natured way. And Emma says, oh, yeah, but there's still a problem, because you're limited to only 3. So what has she just implied?
She's boring.
That she will, there's no way she can limit herself to only 3. Like she's just going to be a myriad, thousands of very boring things are just going to pour out of Miss Bates. Oh, bless her heart. So, okay, we're going to go through the questions in order. We're going to come back around because that's the second question. Actually, I don't like that idea. We're just going to talk about it right now because we've already started. So instantly, I got to read it. It just, it breaks my heart. It's awful. Okay. Okay, Emma could not resist. Ah, ma'am, but there may be difficulty. Pardon me, but you will be limited as to number only 3 at once. Miss Bates, deceived by the mock ceremony of her manner, did not immediately catch her meaning, but when it burst upon her, it could not anger, though a slight blush showed that it could pain her. Ah, well, to be sure, yes, I see what she means, turning to Mr. Knightley, and I will try to hold my tongue. I must make myself very disagreeable, or she would not have said such a thing to an old friend. I must be very disagreeable. I must be a great burden to all of you. Sweet Miss Bates. So, they pass over it. But Mr. Knightley is not going to pass over it. And he says, Emma, I must once more speak to you as I have been used to do. A privilege rather endured than allowed, perhaps, but I must still use it. I cannot see you acting wrong without a remonstrance. How could you be so unfeeling to Miss Bates? How could you be so insolent in your wit to a woman of her character, age, and situation? Emma, I had not thought it possible. Emma recollected, blushed, was sorry, but tried to laugh it off. Nay, how could I help saying what I did? Nobody could have helped it. It was not so very bad. I dare say she did not understand me. I assure you she did. She felt your full meaning. She has talked of it since. I wish you could have heard how she talked of it, with what candor and generosity. I wish you could have heard her honoring your forbearance in being able to pay her such attentions as she was forever receiving from yourself and your father when her society must be so irksome. Oh, cried Emma, I know there's not a better creature in the world, but you must allow that what is good and what is ridiculous are most unfortunately blended in her. They are blended, said he, I acknowledge, and were she prosperous, I could allow much for the occasional prevalence of the ridiculous over the good. Were she a woman of fortune, I would leave every harmless absurdity to take its chance. I would not quarrel with you for any liberties of manner. Were she your equal in situation. But Emma, consider how far this is from being the case. She is poor. She has sunk from the comfort she was born to, and if she lived to old age, must probably sink more. Her situation should secure your compassion. It was badly done indeed. So I don't know about you guys. When you read it, when she did it, did you think it was so very bad? Did it sound like, did you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe she said that? Or was it just kind of,
It was pretty rude.
it was pretty rude.
Like,
But Mark's like, yeah. Maybe that says something about Mark and me, you know? So we're like, yeah, it's not so bad. We live among rude people. I don't know how to say that nice. I feel like just people, we've talked about this, and hopefully you're not on the internet very much. I've decided I'm stepping back from certain things. When I was sick, you know, you don't feel good, and so it's just like I'm going to read the news story and then read the comments. Oh, good Lord, do not look at the comments. Just your faith in humanity plummets. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not skimming through Facebook, and I'm not going there. It just makes me angry. Because people are so rude, but it makes me feel rude. Like, oh, if I had him here, I'd tell him what? I'm like, no, now I'm one of them. I have become one of them. But we are used to a certain level of rudeness. And so, you know, this seems like, oh, what a cute joke. Or, you know, she's the simple one, or whatever. Like, that's not a very nice thing to say, even if the person laughed at it. Tell me about Mr. Knightley taking her aside. Let me read one more thing. He says, "This is not pleasant to you, Emma, and it is very far from pleasant for me. But I will tell you truths while I can, satisfied with proving myself your friend by very faithful counsel, and trusting that you will sometime or other do me greater justice than you can do now." Is Mr. Knightley a good friend?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I mean, he's always there for Emma. Like,
What does always there mean?
like he's always there to give advice. He's always there. If she does something wrong, he points it out. If she's doing good, if that makes sense, he also lets her know.
Yeah.
He's building her character.
Did we talk about, I did in one class, and I can't remember which one, early in the book, you know, the Jane Fairfax situation. She's sick and tired of hearing about Jane Fairfax. And then they invite Jane Fairfax over. And the next day, Mr. Knightley says, "Oh, you seem to have a pretty good time." And she said, "Well, as good a time as I can have with somebody like that, who just is closed up, a sealed vault, and never lets anybody in." And Mr. Knightley said, "I am sorry." And he didn't mean, "I'm sorry you had a bad time." And he didn't mean, "I'm sorry Jane Fairfax doesn't meet your expectations." He meant, "I'm disappointed in you. You seem to be having a good time. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry that that I hoped better from, are saying something like that." And she did. She backpedaled. On the same page down lower, she says, "Well, you know what? She's a fine young woman, and I am heartily sorry for the situation in her life." And Mr. Knightley, "I'm satisfied." All right, good enough. Yeah, you know, you don't have to answer this question. Nobody has to answer this, but maybe it's good for us to think about it. Do we want the friend who will call us out and tell us our faults? Or do we want the friend who will be what is referred to as a yes man? A Harriet Smith, right? Everything you say is always right. Do we want everything you say is always right? Or do we want, I'm going to call a spade, as they say. I'm going to tell you, that stunk, and you need to clean up your act. And, okay, so, you know, some of you said, yes, I want the friend that will, but do we want it when it's happening to us? Do you see what I mean? Like, hopefully you all have a friend, you have someone who will say, "That was a terrible thing to do. That was a bad idea." And will tell you the truth. It's hard to not have them, but it's hard to be that friend. But it's true friendship, isn't it? Mr. Knightley is a good friend in that case. So now we ask ourselves, is Emma a good friend to Harriet? Does Emma tell Harriet when Harriet does something wrong? Has Emma corrected Harriet? Anywhere in this book? What did Harriet kind of want to do early in the book? She got an offer to do something. To do what? To marry Robert Martin. And what did Emma tell her?
That she should.
No, nix on Robert Martin and his ilk. He's not good enough for you. So she tells her, oh, you can't marry Robert Martin. Oh, you need to, Mr. Elton. Mr. Elton's the one for you. And then she's setting her up with Frank Churchill, which blows up also. And so, is it enough to tell somebody you're doing this wrong to be a good friend? Do you see where I'm going? Because it seems like Emma says to Harriet, you're doing the wrong thing, don't marry him. And Mr. Knightley says, you're doing the wrong thing, don't insult Miss Bates. But is there any difference between the two? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, how are the situations different?
Well, Mr. Knightley tells her to clean her act up after. He doesn't just state that she was wrong in doing it.
Okay, he gives her, we would call it constructive criticism, I suppose. Like, you need to be better than this.
He also warned is that Emma technically controls Harriet in one sense, whereas Mr. Knightley lets her make her own decisions.
Yeah. Basically, he says there, the part that I read, I'm going to talk to you while I still have the power to talk to you, because maybe you're going to get mad at me and you're just going to blow me off. Maybe you're going to say, I'm sick and tired of Mr. Knightley's crud. He's always telling me I'm wrong, and I don't want to listen to it anymore. Does Mr. What does Mr. Knightley get out of Emma being better? And is it different than what Emma gets out of Harriet not marrying Robert Martin and pursuing Mr. Elton? Do they get the same thing out of it? Do you see, what does Emma get out of her relationship with Harriet? And what does Mr. Knightley get out of his relationship to Emma in correcting them? Do they get the same thing? And if not, what do you think each of them gets? What's in it for them in correcting this person? Do you see, does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
I guess one thing is that, well, either way, Emma's relationship with Harriet took a dive twice when she made a mistake, whereas Mr. Knightley's in the end it solidified to the point that they ended up getting married.
So it one built up a relationship and one endangered the relationship. Well, could you know beforehand whether it was which direction it's going to go?
In a way you could.
What would you rely on for that, do you think?
Well, for one thing, like the right way to do something, you would expect it to go well if the person, both parties follow the right way of doing something. Whereas the other one is like, you would, like, someone's telling you it would end up wrong, like with Harriet's case, if she married someone high up, they might not want to. And also, like, they don't have any, like, proof that the ideas are going to work in the first place, so.
Mr. Knightley has given pretty solid advice, right? Like, don't diss people publicly, especially when they're worse off than you. It's bad form. Whereas, don't marry farmers. It's not really blanket advice. It should really belong to everybody. Yeah, I guess I was thinking maybe Mr. Knightley gets the fact that he sees the person he loves becoming better. And Emma just gets, I don't know, somebody she can move around on the game board. You know what I mean? The satisfaction of using someone, of making them do whatever you want.
Successful matchmake. And
Yeah.
their tally mark on the board.
Which would be, hey, look at me, says Emma. You know, I did it again. It's hard. Friendship can be a hard thing. But, okay, that is the insult. Let's skip back up now to the first question. Why does Mr. Knightley take an even greater dislike to Frank Churchill in chapter 41? I directed you particularly to 41 because we already know he thinks he's a clod because he went and got his hair cut right after, which, by the way, what did he go to London to do? Did everybody understand as the book ended? What did he do? What was he doing in London that day? Frank Churchill?
Was it visiting his aunt or something?
It's not. Oh, I'm so glad I asked. Do you know, Miriam?
I thought wasn't it Jane Fairfax?
Oh, she was at home she was at the Bateses in Highbury. He bought the piano. He went to London and bought the piano and made arrangements for it to be shipped to Jane Fairfax because they were talking about her playing. The day before, it's like, oh, she doesn't have an instrument. And then the next day he goes and gets his hair cut. And then a few days later, the piano shows up. It's just understood, that.
Yeah.
But anyway, but everybody thinks, oh, that's not quite the thing to go visit your dad finally and then go get your hair cut. But now he's got an even bigger reason. What is his bigger reason to not like Frank Churchill?
Because he suspects he has feelings for Jane Fairfax and Emma.
Yeah. He's playing around with two women at once. I think he's playing around with two women at once, and that is just not okay. You don't play with people and their feelings like they're objects. So, yeah, here's what it says. But this is the cute part. Okay, Mr. Knightley, who for some reason best known to himself had certainly taken an early dislike to Frank Churchill. What, now that you've read the whole book, what is the some reason best known only to himself that he took a dislike to Frank Churchill? He loves Emma. Stay away from Emma. Some reason best known only to himself. Some reason he took an early dislike. Was only growing to dislike him more. He began to suspect him of some double dealing in his pursuit of Emma. That Emma was his object appeared undisputable. Everything declared it. His own attentions, his father's hints, his mother-in-law's guarded silence. But while so many were devoting him to Emma, and Emma herself making him over to Harriet, Mr. Knightley began to suspect him of some inclination to trifle with Jane Fairfax. He could not understand it, but there were symptoms of intelligence between them. He thought so, at least. Symptoms of admiration on his side, which, having once observed, he could not persuade himself to think entirely void of meaning. I think there are looks that happen between Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax that I can't understand, but they know each other better than, of course, they do. They're engaged to be married, and Emma is just a smokescreen this whole time, which, by the way, could have gone really poorly. What if Emma had really fallen for him? Fortunately, she did the little, I think I might be slightly in love, but it's nothing I won't get over sort of thing. And so we had an episode, and I don't know if you caught this, if you noticed it. They were all together. They all, I mean, the main people, the Bateses and Jane Fairfax. And Frank Churchill's there. And Frank Churchill, they're walking along, and Frank Churchill says, oh, whatever happened with Mr. Cole in the carriage? Wasn't he going to set up a carriage? And Emma said, well, I haven't heard anything about that. And Mr. Knightley was like, I don't know. I just talked to the Coles. I never heard anything about that. Now, Miss Bates, if somebody would actually listen to Miss Bates occasionally, Miss Bates actually says things worth hearing. You have to listen to a lot that's not worth hearing to find it. So she says, and then Frank says, oh, I must have dreamed it. I must have dreamed it. And Miss Bates is like, well, isn't that a remarkable dream? Because you know what? Mr. Cole was going to set up a... Don't you remember, Jane? Mrs. Cole came and she was talking to us and she said, oh, Mr. Cole was going to set up a carriage. But she only told us. She said it was kind of a secret. And I don't think I told anyone. I don't know how he could have found out. What a remarkable dream. And it's like, oh. And so, of course, what has happened is Jane has told him in a letter. Jane has written letters constantly to Frank Churchill and told him everything that happens. And he suddenly remembers, oh, shoot. I found that out from Jane, and I'm not supposed to know, and I'm not supposed to be in contact with Jane, and so I need to just say it was a dream. And he tries to cover it up. Well, they go to wherever, Hartfield, wherever their destination is, and they're playing another one of these games, right, where they scrambled. You just give them a bunch of letter tiles, and you have to unscramble the word. And she unscrambles it, and it's blunder. The word's blunder, mistake. And she just kind of passes away because she knows what the blunder was. Frank is saying, they're having their little joke, right? But Mr. Knightley sees. What is going on? What's the blunder? And it says, Mr. Knightley connected it with the dream. But how it could all be was beyond his comprehension. He feared there must be some decided involvement. Disingenuousness and double dealing seemed to meet him at every turn. These letters were but the vehicle for gallantry and trick. It was a child's play, chosen to conceal a deeper game on Frank Churchill's part. A deeper game. And it's interesting that after Mr. Knightley reads Frank's letter, after everything's out in the open, everybody knows about Jane, everybody knows everything and what's been going on, and Frank writes this very long letter to Emma, basically apologizing for anything he might have done that was improper, and Mr. Knightley reads it, and it says, Mr. Knightley says, very bad, though it might have been worse, playing a most dangerous game. Just kidding. He's playing a very dangerous game. Frank Churchill is just playing a game. Isn't this fun? And I'm going to hide my relationship with Jane, and I'll just use Emma, and it's so much fun to fool everybody. Aren't we having a great time? And I said it could have turned out very badly. Fortunately, it turns out okay. Everybody lands on their feet. But guys, has anybody else been playing a game? Has anybody else spent this book playing games with people? She just plays with Harriet. She plays with Frank Churchill back, right? I'm going to set Harriet up with Frank Churchill. That'll be perfect. It'll make him get over, whatever he feels for me, apparently. And she's playing with people, too. She and Frank really are a pretty good match, I mean, they're not really thinking about other people. They're only thinking about themselves, yeah. We mentioned this, I think we mentioned this a couple weeks ago. You remember remember all the games that Mr. Elton was playing, the riddles? This book is full of people playing games, literal games, but also just games with people. Like, oh, I'm going to pretend my shoelace is broken so we can go to Mr. Elton's house and check out his house so Harriet can see his house. And just playing games with people. And so, listen to what Mr. Knightley says. Just a second, see if I can, it was just there. This is at the end, when he says he was playing a dangerous game. My Emma, does not everything serve to prove more and more the beauty of truth and sincerity in all our dealings with each other? If people would just tell the truth, be sincere. What does it mean? What does sincere mean? This is one of my favorite things. The word history of sincere. It means honest, literally. I'll tell you this. If I learn these things, then I never forget. So this is why I pass them. Sincera. Sincera, sincere. It means without wax. What? Okay. It means that if you have a pot, and this is my really, really horrible pot, okay, and it's broken, right, and the little chunk is gone, people would fill it in with wax, right? Or, you guys are familiar, you have a letter, and you put the wax seal on it, and you break, but that you can fill it in with extra wax so nobody knows. So it's to fill in a breakage or something like that. But if you do, then it's not intact anymore, right? It's hiding the fact that it's been broken or damaged in some way. So without wax, it's the real deal, right? It's true blue through and through. It's not been broken. You're not hiding any imperfections in it. And so that's sincerity, is being without wax. You're not patching up the dodgy bits, that you don't want people to know about. And so Mr. Knightley says, if we would just be sincere, if we just be true and real. And so playing little games with each other. I mean, honestly, it turned out fine. But the whole book started with a game. Emma set up Miss Taylor and Mr. Weston. She played a little matchmaking game, and it got the whole ball rolling, the whole book rolling for us. Because they warned her not to do it, and she's like, oh, I'm good at that. I'm going to do it again. Okay, in chapter 44, Emma goes to the Bates home to apologize. It is the next day, and Mr. Knightley, fortunately, has gotten through to her. As a matter of fact, let me read at the beginning of chapter 44. I must, skip down. Miss Bates should never again, no, never. If attention in future could do away with the past, she might hope to be forgiven. She had often been remiss. Her conscience told her so. Remiss perhaps more in thought than fact. Scornful, ungracious, but it should be so no more. In the warmth of true contrition, she would call upon her the very next morning, and it should be the beginning on her side of a regular, equal, and kindly intercourse. At the beginning of that paragraph, it says that it was in her thoughts all evening, that the recollection was to be abhorred. So she gets up the next day, and she's going to go to the Bateses, and she's going to do it right this time. And this is the question I asked you. With what attitude had she always paid visits there before? Why has she always gone to the Bateses before? This is what you do. They're tiresome. I don't really want to go. Looks bad if I don't go.
She never had a very good attitude about it.
No, never. And in fact, she says that okay, so you give them your card, right? And then they go with the maid or whatever, says so-and-so is at the door. And they come back and say, they're not here, they're here, whatever. The ladies were all at home. That was announced. In other words, we're willing to see you. She had never rejoiced at the sound before, nor ever before entered the passage, nor walked up the stairs with any wish of giving pleasure, but in conferring obligation, or of deriving it except in subsequent ridicule. The only thing Emma gets out of it is the stupid stuff Miss Bates says, and she can repeat it to other people and laugh about it. She never goes with any wish of giving pleasure, but in conferring obligation. I did my duty. And she realizes this. I never visit these women because it's kind. It's like, well, I'll do that. Mark that off my list. So Jane has taken a governess position because who knows what Frank Churchill's up to. And Miss Bates comes in. She had a moment's fear of Miss Bates keeping away from her. But Miss Bates soon came, very happy and obliged. But Emma's conscience told her that there was not the same cheerful volubility as before, less ease of look and manner. A very friendly inquiry after Miss Fairfax, she hoped, might lead the way to a return of old feelings. The touch seemed immediate. So she meets Miss Bates, and Miss Bates isn't quite what she was, a little cold. Oh, very nice of you to come. What does Emma do to turn it around? What does Emma ask about? I will read it again. Not the whole thing, but. A very friendly inquiry after Miss Fairfax, she hoped, might lead the way to a return of old feelings. The touch seemed immediate. Because what's the magic word? The magic word for Miss Bates is not please. The magic word is Jane Fairfax. Miss Bates loves to talk about Jane Fairfax. Does Emma like hearing about Jane Fairfax? So, does it cost Emma something to say, well, and how is Jane? Because there's nothing generally that Emma wants to hear less about than how is Jane. But she knows Miss Bates. This will please Miss Bates, and it does. Ah, Miss Woodhouse, how kind you are. I suppose you've heard and are coming to give us joy that she's got this job. And it goes on. And then there's a lull. And Emma says, that it must be a severe trial to them all. She had understood it was to be delayed until Colonel Campbell's return. I thought she wasn't going to take a position until the Campbells got back. So very kind, replied Miss Bates, but you are always kind. There was no bearing such an always. And to break through her dreadful gratitude, Emma made the direct inquiry of, where, may I ask, is Miss Fairfax going? You're always so kind, Miss Woodhouse. Miss Bates is truly the nicest lady in this book, maybe. If we might want to compare her to Mrs. Elton. Who takes offense when none is given. And offense is given, Miss Bates, and she gets over it. I was like, you're right, I am just intolerable. So I wrote this, I jotted down this little question for all of ourselves, me included. Is why we do something just as important as what we do? Can you do the right thing in the wrong way, with a wrong attitude or motives? I think so. This is very Thomas Aquinas-ish of us, who said, that sin, it's not just the wrong thing, but sometimes it's the right thing at the wrong time, or with the wrong motives. If it was just a matter of, here's the list of rules, and I made sure I kept them all, it would be so much easier, But it's not, unfortunately. It's a lot to do with, well, why did I do that? Did I take, so I was going to say give money. Like the Pharisee who drops some money in the box and prays loudly, oh, thank you, God, that I'm not like this pathetic tax collector here next to me, And then he just beats his breast and says, have mercy upon me, a sinner. And Jesus said, which one went home justified before God? Not the guy with all the fancy words. But he was doing the right thing. Like he was praying. He was doing the right thing. He was doing it for all the wrong motives. Or putting the money in the box, and the widow who puts in her 2 mites that she has to live on, like she put in everything she had. Yeah. So, Emma did the right thing. She goes and visits the Bateses. It's like, oh, it's time to do that again. And on the outside, it looked like it was fine. She didn't go and insult them every time. She and her dad are in the habit of sending, food over, although, I don't know if you remember this. At one point in the book, they were talking about sending the Bateses, I don't know, like a side of beef or part of a pig or something like that, some meat. And she was telling her dad, yes, I dutifully, I'm picking the best cuts and, but there's no love. You just like, this will be appropriate. This is proper to give them this piece and this piece and this piece. Then later on, we find out that Mr. Knightley has sent a bunch of apples to the Bateses. And it comes out that he sent all his stock for everything he had till the next season. And the Bateses find out, what? He gave us everything? And Mr. Knightley just doesn't even talk about it, right? Emma's very, she's talking in front of Mr. Knightley. And, yes, we're sending this piece of pork over, blah, 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 Is she doing it to be looked at? I don't know. Mr. Knightley just send him everything. Just send him everything we got. Don't tell him. And he does it kind of under the table. And it's really charity. So it kind of makes you wonder if Emma's charity has been very charitable. Do you remember, we find out she's a bit like this. At the very beginning of the book, the day they go to Mr. Elton's, the day they're walking down the road, and the shoelace episode and everything, and they went to actually pay a visit on a poor family, if you remember that, and to take them some food or money or whatever. And she went out, and Emma says to Harriet, oh, seeing these poor families, it just, I'm just going to not forget. It's just going to make me feel how fortunate I am to have what I have and how these people live. And then she says, I just don't think I'm going to forget. And then she forgets on the very same page. It's the very same page. A few sentences down, she says, oh, well, we've talked about them enough. We've done enough. Now, let's talk about Mr. Elton. She just switches it off. She means well, but it doesn't stay with her. Anyway, but before we leave Miss Bates and move on, I just wanted to point out. Read this because we mentioned Mrs. Elton. The quiet. This is a description. I think this is after everything has come out, and everybody knows that Jane and Frank are engaged, and she's visiting the Bateses. And this is the description of Miss Bates. The quiet, heartfelt satisfaction of the old lady would be old Mrs. Bates, and the rapturous delight of her daughter, Miss Bates, who proved even too joyous to talk as usual, had been a gratifying yet almost an affecting scene. They were both so truly respectable in their happiness, so disinterested in every sensation, thought so much of Jane, so much of everybody, and so little of themselves, that every kindly feeling was at work for them. Love that. They thought so much of Jane, so much of everybody, and so little of themselves. How would we have to phrase that if we were talking about Mrs. Elton? She thought so much of everybody and so little of herself, or how would we? So little of others. Yes. And isn't it interesting that Miss Bates is the one who's fallen on hard times and is no longer really genteel, we would say? Yeah. Mrs. Elton has sort of married up and has taken a step up in the world. But who's the true noble lady? It's Miss Bates, the one who's technically not nobility anymore. She's much more genteel, we would say. Okay. Okay, how was Emma once again mistaken in regards to Harriet? Who does she think Harriet's in love with? And who is Harriet in love with? Oh my goodness. Good God, cried Emma. This has been a most unfortunate, most deplorable mistake. What is to be done? Mr. Knightley's never going to marry you. What have I have Frankenstein. I've created a monster. Who thinks she could marry Mr. Knightley? Emma's eyes were instantly withdrawn. She sat silently meditating in a fixed attitude for a few minutes. A few minutes were sufficient for making her acquainted with her own heart. Mr. Knightley must marry no one but herself. She has been lying to herself the whole time. Remember why? Oh, Mr. Knightley must not marry Jane Fairfax. Why, did she say?
Because of the inheritance.
Yeah, little Henry must have done well. Really? Really? You You don't know yourself at all. Her own conduct as well as her own heart was before her in the same few minutes. She saw it all with clearness which had never blessed her before. How improperly had she been acting by Harriet? How inconsiderate, how indelicate, how irrational, how unfeeling had been her conduct. What blindness, what madness had led her on. She suddenly knows herself. It says how to understand it all, how to understand the deceptions she had been thus practicing on herself and living under. With insufferable vanity had she believed herself in the secret of everybody's feelings. With unpardonable arrogance proposed to arrange everybody's destiny. She was proved to have been universally mistaken. She had not quite done nothing, for she had done mischief. She had brought evil on Harriet, on herself, and she too much feared on Mr. Knightley. And was that not her own doing too? Who had been at pains to give Harriet notions of self-consequence but herself? She suddenly realizes who she is. Guys, is it easy to know ourselves really? Our motives? Really know ourselves? What sometimes is required to get to know ourselves?
Like a mistake or an error.
Something bad, something unpleasant. You know, we're not very bright, and we don't learn things when everything's just hunky-dory in general. I mean, we could, we just don't, you know. And she has to go through a lot of unpleasant. She thinks she has lost Mr. Knightley. And it's going to be bad for Mr. Knightley. In fact, do we remember, it comes out, Harriet's dad is just some tradesman who made some money, enough money to send Harriet to Mrs. Goddard's. Apparently was not married to Harriet's mother. It's a bad situation. And it would reflect poorly on the guy who married her, but not the Robert Martins of the world. At the level that she was always supposed to be staying at, it was a good match for Harriet. Yeah, we don't, it is hard to know ourselves. So at the end, this was kind of an open-ended question, how has Emma changed? We've talked about this. She says it would be a great pleasure to know Robert Martin when she finds out Harriet has actually accepted his proposal again. What did she think of Robert Martin at the beginning of the book?
She just thought he was like lower class.
Low class. Oh, yeah. I may have seen him in the street, but I would never really look at anybody like that. It could be beneath me. Now she's like, you know what? It will be a pleasure to know Robert Martin. Mr. Knightley thinks he's a good guy. And he's good for Harriet. Yeah, does anybody have a comment, question, something that was cool, something that you didn't understand how it worked out, something in the plot that was a mystery? Pretty sure all the mysteries came out. But you went to London to buy that piano. It was from Frank. And of course, keep in mind that the whole little joke between him and Emma about how Mr. Dixon must be in love with Jane Fairfax and bought her the piano. Frank told Jane everything in letters. How humiliating to Emma to know later that this little private joke they had about the supposed crush of Mr. Dixon. Jane knew it all. Jane knew it. I know it was all just a put on. Jane always knew where the piano came from. All right, here's what I want you to do for next week. I want you to choose a character from Emma, as I mentioned before break. Now that we've had a chance to discuss it all, the model for the paper you're going to write is in the book, is in your reading guide, on pages 124 and 125. Pick a character to either praise or blame. I'm pretty sure probably all of you have done one of these for me before, maybe. I don't know if we did them the Romeo. Okay, so you know what? You know what to do. I would like you to include parallelism 1, parallelism 2, antithesis, and alliteration. Does anybody want me to review any of these? Are we good? Use the model as a guide. I don't expect it to be super long. Do you have a question, Noah?
So should we write it just like him, or should we like combine the paragraph?
Yeah, just like him. You can separate the paragraphs, so I know. Now, if you hit something like birth and education, all right, you might need to combine those. And how might we speculate? You know, for example, say you have picked Miss Bates, and you're like, well, what do I know about her birth or education? We do have a hint. Do you remember what Mr. Knightley said about her past? He said this to Emma when he was chewing Emma out for being rude. He said, Miss Bates used to be what?
She used to be high class.
She used to be of a higher status than she is now. She has come down in the world. She's not got the money she used to. We don't know what's happened. But we can speculate, right, that Miss Bates, they once lived well. That Miss Bates is talky, but she knows the social niceties, right? She just talks a lot. So we could speculate that she had a good upbringing and education because she lived in a higher class family with more money, right? We could make guesses, but it's okay you have my permission to infer anything you want to from the information we've been given about these people and how they act. For example, Mrs. Elton, it appears, that she wasn't from such a high-class family because she's always on about Maple Grove and Mr. Suckling and her sister and how awesome they are and how awesome their carriage is. And so it's a little much. It's a little much. Mr. Knightley doesn't go around bragging about his carriage and how awesome Donwell is. He doesn't need to. Mrs. Elton does. So do the best you can to follow the format. Be as flowery in your language as you want. This would be a rhetorical showpiece. This would be a practice piece for people giving speeches, and so you can lay it on as thick as you want. So bring me that next week. Next week, we are going to start reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Now, how many of you have read Tom Sawyer? Okay. How many of you have read Huckleberry Finn already? Great. Well, we're going to read it again because a good book can be read again. And hopefully you'll get more out of it. I want to mention a couple of things about Mark Twain, but the biggest thing I want to mention is this. There are no questions in your reading guide for Huckleberry Finn. This is not a mistake. I want you to get paper, and I want you to summarize each chapter. I do not want you to write a whole chapter on the chapter. That's not summarizing. For an example, this is my Emma. It is 4 pages. Red means it's a quote I liked, and the blue is just my summary. So, for example, some of the stuff that we read. Here's Mrs. Elton and Mr. Weston discuss Frank. John Knightley discusses leaving his 2 boys in the care of Emma and Mr. Woodhouse. That's it. That's my summary for this chapter. Harriet confesses herself to be quite over Mr. Elton, but enamored of someone far above her station who did her a service, presumably Frank Churchill. The end. 1 to 3 sentences. You should be able to do it in 3 sentences or less, which means, will you include everything? Oh, no. You're going to have to read a chapter and then stop and say, what happened in this chapter? What was the important stuff? You're allowed to glance back. You don't, it's fine. But this is, and I want you to do it, I'm going to check them. I'm not going to collect them because then you can't keep doing it. But I'm going to come around. I want you to show me. I want you to do it. This is really the best way to read a novel. Some of you mentioned, it's not in this class, but Then when we read Tale of Two Cities, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people. If you do this, and if you keep a little running character, it helps so much. It helps so much. I do this for a lot of books that I read. And then also if I get derailed, like I'm reading and then I read 20 chapters and then suddenly I got sick, maybe some of my students gave me the plague and I was sick for 10 days. And then I didn't read and then I forget what was going on. And then I can read, what just happened? Oh yeah, I'm good. So this is what I want you to do. I will come around and I will look at them. I'll do the mom. Did you do it? But it's 1 to 3 sentences. But you're going to have to make that executive decision. This is important. This is not important. And it's a good practice. Okay, about Mark Twain and about what's in the reading guide. First of all, we said Poe is creepy. Creepy is Poe's MO. What is Mark Twain's MO? What is he known for? Like what vibe is he known for? Adventure, maybe. Is he known for being super serious? No. Well, maybe his characters. I don't know that he is particularly, but humor. He's a humor writer. He's kind of snarky and sarcastic. Now, Dominic, you might be the only one. Neil, maybe. This was the year of COVID. And I think it was the junior high class. And do you remember reading the Recollections of Joan of Arc?
Oh, yeah.
Did you read that with me, Mark Twain? Mark Twain wrote this, and Catherine says it's like one of her favorite things we ever read. She really liked the Joan of Arc book, except it took us 6 weeks to read it because it's really, really long. But it's not, the weird thing is it's not funny or snarky. Mark Twain loved Joan of Arc for some weird reason, for the snarky, probably agnostic or atheist guy that he was. But he's like, but Joan of Arc is awesome. I wrote this amazing book about Joan of Arc. So I had students that used to read that. It was really good. But in general, he writes funny stuff, but not stand-up comedy funny stuff. Like kind of subtly, silly funny. And so, for example, those of you who've read Tom Sawyer know the famous thing where Tom has to whitewash the fence, but he convinces all the boys who come along. He's like, yeah, Tom's got to do the fence. He's like, yeah, lucky me. And he's like, I'd let you do it, but it's just too much fun, And they're like, can we? How much money will you take? I'll pay you. And he gets the whole thing done by his friends, and he pockets money because he has let on that it's a great privilege and honor and great fun to have to pay the fence. And so that's sort of humor. If you have read Tom Sawyer, then you're in a really good position for Huckleberry Finn. If you haven't, it's okay. They're repeating characters. But if you've only read Tom Sawyer but not Huck Finn, you will discover that Huck Finn is a very different sort of book. But there's some things in the reading guide that I want you to read. First of all, I have a 2-page spread here on pages 134 and 135. And maybe you know this. Mark Twain is not his name. His name is Samuel Clemens. Mark Twain is a call that riverboatmen used to make when they let down a line to measure how deep the water was, because you don't want to get stranded on a shoal, And so the riverboats that go up and down the Mississippi, and perhaps you know this, there are shallow places, that you don't want your boat to get stuck on. So they would mark, and Mark Twain meant there were 2 fathoms of water. Mark Twain. And so he liked that sound because he grew up on the Mississippi in Hannibal, Missouri, a Mississippi River port city. And so just was enmeshed in that world, which I don't love living in the Quad Cities, but this is the one thing I love, that I get to live on the Mississippi. I don't live literally on the Mississippi, but I see it every week more than once, and you know what I mean? And I walk along it, it's cool, because it's the Mississippi River. It's all Mark Twainish, and I get very excited about it. So he For a while, he was a riverboat captain. He thought he wanted to be a riverboat captain because it was the most awesome job you could possibly be if you were a young man. And so he wrote a book called Life on the Mississippi. And this is an excerpt from it. And I want you to read this. The whole book is worth reading, but I'm just asking you to read a page and a little section. But this is autobiographical, all right? This is really Mark Twain speaking to us. The other thing I want you to read, it's the next few pages. It goes on from 136 to 139. And it is historical. The first page is an introduction. It is about the Fugitive Slave Act. Huckleberry Finn was written in the 1880s, well after the Civil War. But it's set in the 1850s, before the Civil War, when slavery was still in existence, and Missouri was a slave state. So Mark Twain grew up in a place where they had slaves. And this is the world of Huckleberry Finn. And so because, many of you know this, a slave running away is a major plot point of Huckleberry Finn, I thought it was worth looking back at this. And so this is an introduction to the Fugitive Slave Act, which said that if a slave runs away and you know about it and you find him, even if he is in a free state, you have to return him to his master legally. And then this is an eyewitness account of it happening. A slave had escaped to a free state. It was somewhere on the East Coast. It was like Pennsylvania or something, I don't know. And people almost rioted in the streets because they were so against returning the slave. They thought it was just unconscionable. But it was the law. So I want you to read this because it gives it some historical context. And then I want you to read chapters 1 through 16 of Huckleberry Finn and just do a 1 to 3 sentence synopsis of each chapter. You know, Huck Finn is a poor orphan boy who is a friend of Tom Sawyer and I don't know what he does and visits with the slave Jim, and he lives with the widow Douglas. He doesn't live with widow Douglas, but does he? I don't remember. So summarize each chapter. And the only thing, if you haven't read it before, the only, I don't know, warning, there's dialect. Do you know what I mean? These people don't all speak standard English. So the black slaves have their own way of talking. And if you have trouble with it, it helps to say it out loud, to pronounce it the way it's spelled, and then you will start to figure out what they're saying. But at first, I've had students, you kind of trip over it a little bit, like, oh, I have no idea what this guy just said. But if you just say it phonetically, so like the main character, the slave Jim, instead of child, child. And Mark Twain spells it C-H-I-L-E, child. Or chillin'. C-H-I-L-L-U, chillin'. And you realize it means children. Child means child. And so if you say it the way it's spelled and just kind of work your way through it, it's like one of those games where everything's spelled different, but then you hear it. And so that shouldn't last through the whole book. You'll get used to it and you'll know how to reckon. But the first few chapters, when you meet some of these characters, like, oh my goodness, what is he saying? I have no idea. And then there's some very southernish talking later in the book as well. That's all. Any questions? Write the encomium or invective. Remember, not both. You're either going to praise someone highly or find fault with them. And then read chapters 1 through 16 of Huckleberry Finn and summarize each chapter. And I will see you next week.
If I want to type the book summary, and I don't want to print out every individual chapter to show you, just show it every 10 chapters or something.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because I tend to
No, that's fine. You go for it then. Absolutely.